He handed her divorce papers on their anniversary. She signed every page without reading a single line, then smiled. By sunrise, she was gone. No calls, no messages, no trace. And for the first time in his life, the most feared man in New York had no idea where his wife had gone, or what she had left behind. The reservation had been made 6 weeks in advance. Table 12 at Aurelius, a restaurant so exclusive that senators had been turned away at the door. The lighting was engineered to make every woman look like she belonged on a magazine cover, and every man looked like he owned something worth covering. It was the kind of place that charged $400 for a piece of fish and made you feel grateful for the privilege. Darien Voss had reserved it for their 7th anniversary. His assistant sent the confirmation. His driver confirmed the pickup time. His security detail swept the block twice before the car even pulled to the curb. Everything was arranged with the same clinical precision Darien brought to every aspect of his life: the movement of money, the deployment of men, the management of violence. He was thorough, he was methodical, he was above all else controlled. What his assistant didn't know, what his driver didn't know, and what his security detail certainly didn't know, was what Darien had placed inside the breast pocket of his jacket before leaving the penthouse that evening. A leather folder. Slim, dark brown, the kind that looked expensive because it was. Inside it, divorce papers. They were notarized, dated, and waiting only for 2 signatures to become the legal dissolution of 7 years of marriage. He had them prepared 3 weeks ago. He had read them twice, signed his own name on the appropriate lines, and then placed them in the drawer of his home office beneath a stack of quarterly financial reports where Nyla would never think to look. He had told himself he was waiting for the right moment. In reality, he was waiting to see if he would change his mind. He hadn't changed his mind. The car moved through Manhattan's rain-slicked streets with the smooth inevitability of a river finding its mouth. October rain fell in sheets against the windows, blurring the city into streaks of yellow and white. It was the million lights of a place that never slept and never forgave. Darien sat in the back seat with his hands folded in his lap. He watched the wet city scroll past and felt nothing in particular. That was his gift. That was also, though he would never have admitted it, his disease. Nyla was already at the table when he arrived. She had beaten him there, which she always did. 7 years, and she had never once been late to anything. Dinner, meetings with lawyers, charity galas she attended on his behalf when he couldn't be bothered. She was already seated at table 12 with a glass of still water in front of her. Her dark hair was pinned up in a way that showed the long line of her neck. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress that Darien dimly recognized as the one she had bought for their 5th anniversary and never worn. That dinner had been canceled when a business situation required his immediate attention. She had worn it tonight anyway. She looked up when he sat down. Her eyes were dark, steady, and giving away nothing. They moved across his face the way they always did. It was a look that had once made him feel understood, and now made him feel observed. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine," he replied. "I ordered water," she said. "I didn't know what you'd want to drink." "Water's fine," he told her. A waiter appeared. Darien ordered bourbon. The waiter disappeared. The restaurant hummed around them. There was low music. There was the murmur of other people's conversations, and the soft percussion of silverware against china. At the table nearest to them, a couple in their 60s leaned toward each other with the ease of people who had spent decades learning how to occupy the same space. Darien looked at them briefly and then looked away. Nyla was watching him. "You're quiet," she said. It was not an accusation, just an observation. "I'm always quiet," he said. "You're a different kind of quiet tonight," she told him. He didn't answer that. The bourbon arrived. He wrapped his hand around the glass and thought about how to begin. He decided that there was no way to begin that would make this anything other than what it was. He reached into his jacket and removed the leather folder. He set it on the table between their water glasses and the small vase of white flowers the restaurant had placed there for ambiance. Nyla looked at the folder. She didn't reach for it immediately. She looked at it the way she looked at most things, without hurry, with a quality of attention that had always made Darien feel, even at the best of times, as though she was reading something in the air around an object rather than the object itself. "What is this?" she asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. "Open it," he said. She opened it. The papers were inside, clean and crisp, with his signature already in place on every required line. She looked at the first page for a moment. Then she turned to the second, then the third. She didn't read them. Not the way a person reads something unfamiliar. She moved through the pages the way someone moves through a room they have already memorized, confirming rather than discovering. When she reached the last page, she set it down carefully. "Celeste Vale," she said. He hadn't mentioned Celeste's name anywhere in the papers. He didn't ask how she knew. "Yes," he said. Nyla nodded once. A small nod, barely a movement at all. She picked up her glass of water, took a small sip, and set it back down with the same precision with which she did everything. The rain pressed against the restaurant's tall windows. Across the room, the older couple were laughing at something. "You've been seeing her for how long?" Nyla asked. "That's not relevant to how long," Darien replied. He held her gaze. 14 months, he said. She absorbed that. Her expression didn't collapse. It didn't harden. It remained what it always was. Composed, present, and impossible to fully read. He had spent 7 years trying to read that face, and had never entirely succeeded. That failure had frustrated him and fascinated him in equal measure, until the fascination ran out and only the frustration remained. "And you love her," Nyla said. It was not a question. "I did once, before all of this," he said. He gestured vaguely, meaning the empire, the organization, and the criminal machinery that had consumed the last decade of his life. "She represents something I had before I became." He stopped. "Before you became what you are," Nyla finished quietly. "Yes," he said. Another silence. The waiter reappeared, hovering at the edge of the table with a question about their order. Darien dismissed him with a look. The man evaporated. Nyla was still looking at the papers. She reached into her small clutch and produced a pen. A simple ballpoint, nothing fancy. And without ceremony, without hesitation, without reading a single word of the document in front of her, she signed her name on every page that required it. Her handwriting was what it always was. Clear, unhurried, and certain. She closed the folder and slid it back across the table to him. Then she looked up, and she smiled. It was not the smile Darien had expected. He had braced himself without fully acknowledging that he was bracing. He was ready for tears, for anger, for the particular cold fury that came from a woman who had given years of herself to a man and was now being handed the legal documentation of his indifference. He had prepared himself for a scene, or at the very minimum for pain made visible. What he got was a smile. It was calm, unreadable, and carried something in it that he couldn't name and couldn't dismiss. It sat in the back of his skull the way a sound sits in a room after its source has stopped. "I hope she gives you everything you think you're looking for," Nyla said. She rose from the table. She picked up her small clutch. She looked at him one more time, not with hatred, not with sorrow, not with any of the emotions he had anticipated. And then she walked across the restaurant with her spine straight and her steps unhurried. She pushed through the door into the October rain. Darien sat alone at table 12. He picked up his bourbon. He finished it. He told himself he felt relief. The penthouse was silent when he returned. It wasn't the silence of someone sleeping, or of someone in another room, or of someone deliberately making themselves absent as a form of protest. It was a different silence. It was the kind that has texture to it. The kind that tells you before you have turned on a single light that a space has been vacated. He walked through the front rooms without urgency. His security detail waited downstairs. His driver had been dismissed for the evening. It was just Darien and the penthouse, and the rain still hammering at the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Midtown and the dark rectangle of the park beyond. He checked the bedroom. Her side of the closet was empty, not ransacked, not hastily cleared, but empty in the deliberate way of someone who had packed methodically over time, taking only what was theirs. There were no empty hangers left behind. There were no indentations in the carpet from luggage wheels. There were no half-open drawers with forgotten items. Nothing that would suggest she had left in a hurry. She had left in complete order. He stood in the doorway of the closet for a long moment. He looked at the empty shelves, the bare rod, and the single remaining item. It was a dry cleaning bag, sealed, containing a coat he recognized as one of his own that she must have picked up without mentioning. She had even remembered his dry cleaning. He checked her bathroom. Her vanity was clear. Her medications were gone. The small framed photograph that had sat on the left side of the mirror was missing. It was a picture of the two of them at a friend's wedding, before the weight of the organization had settled fully onto his shoulders, before he had become the kind of man who required a security sweep before dinner. She had taken it. He wasn't sure why that particular detail lodged itself in his chest. He walked to his office and checked his phone. No missed calls, no messages. He called her number from muscle memory and listened to it ring 6 times before going to voicemail. Her voice, level and unhurried, invited him to leave a message. He hung up without speaking. He called again. Same result. He set the phone down on his desk and looked out at the rain. By midnight, he had sent 3 messages. None of them were answered. By 2 in the morning, he had his security team making discreet inquiries. By 4, the inquiries were no longer discreet. By sunrise, every asset Darien Voss commanded had been tasked in one capacity or another with the same objective. Find Nyla Hartwell. The answer that came back, at first from his security chief, and then hours later from the 2 private investigators he had on retainer for exactly this kind of situation, was the same answer in different words. Nothing. She had gone, and she had gone clean, and she had left nothing behind her that a person could follow. 3 weeks after the anniversary dinner, Celeste Vale moved into the penthouse. She came with furniture, her own, not Nyla's. She brought boxes of her things and a decorator she had apparently already hired. The decorator arrived the following Tuesday to assess the space with the brisk professionalisms of someone who had been given this assignment well in advance. The decorator had opinions about lighting, the view, and what she called the emotional coldness of certain neutral palettes. Darien told her she could do what she liked with the living spaces. He closed the door to his office and made 3 phone calls. Celeste was 34 years old. She had grown up in Connecticut, studied art history, and briefly pursued a career in gallery curation before discovering that proximity to power was more interesting than proximity to art. She was sharp-minded and physically striking, and she moved through social situations with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime practicing. When Darien had known her 12 years ago, before his father's death, before the inheritance of the organization, before all of it, she had been something closer to what she really was. Ambitious, yes, but also young enough that the ambition hadn't yet calcified into something harder. Now she was 34, and she wanted things, and she was good at wanting them in ways that looked like something else. He knew this about her. He had always known this about her. He told himself it didn't matter. In the first weeks, the tabloids did what tabloids do. His name had been in the papers before. Carefully worded articles that hovered around the edges of what he was without ever landing directly on it. Profiles that described him as a businessman with varied interests. A philanthropist with connections to various municipal initiatives. Now his name appeared alongside Celeste's, and the framing was of a rekindled romance. A powerful man who had chosen love over a long marriage that had run its course. The word glamorous appeared in 3 separate publications. Nyla's name appeared in none of them. This should have felt like a victory. He was aware, at some level, that it should have felt like a victory. He had exited a marriage that had stopped working. A marriage in which he felt increasingly unseen, in which Nyla's quiet competence had somehow made him feel diminished rather than supported. He had reclaimed something from his life before the organization had consumed it. He was supposed to feel free. Instead, he felt like a man who had put down a weight he'd been carrying so long that its absence had changed the way he moved. The first crack appeared at a dinner party hosted by one of his associates' wives. The gathering was at a townhouse on the Upper East Side. 30 people catered the kind of event that required a certain kind of presence and a certain kind of conversation. Darien had attended dozens of these over the years with Nyla at his side, and it had never occurred to him to notice how much of the social architecture she quietly maintained. The way she remembered names, spouses, and children's ages. The way she navigated the invisible tensions between certain couples and certain business rivals with the deftness of someone diffusing a mechanism she had mapped in advance. The way she knew when to speak for him, and when to let him speak, and when to move them both toward the exit before a conversation became a problem. Celeste moved through the party like a woman who wanted to be seen moving through a party. She was charming. She said the right things to the right people. But twice, Darien watched her misjudge a room. Once, saying something flippant to the wife of a man Darien owed a significant professional debt. Once, pressing a business conversation with one of his captains past the point where such conversations were appropriate in mixed company. Each time, Darien managed the situation. Each time, Celeste looked at him afterward with an expression that suggested she didn't understand what had required managing. On the ride home, she was bright and animated, talking about the party in a way that suggested she had experienced a completely different event. "That was wonderful," she said. "I think I made a real impression on the Kowalski couple." Darien looked out the window at the passing city. "The Kowalski couple," he said. "Yes, Marcus, and I'm forgetting her name," Celeste replied. "She was a little cold at first, but I think she came around." Marcus Kowalski's wife's name was Vera. And she had been cold because Celeste had made a passing comment about the remodel of their townhouse that landed close enough to an insult to register without being actionable. Nyla would never have made that comment. More than that, Nyla would have found out about the remodel in advance, said something specific and genuine about it, and turned Vera Kowalski into an ally before the appetizers arrived. "She warmed up eventually," Darien said. "I thought so," Celeste smiled. She took his hand and leaned against him in the back of the car, and Darien looked at the ceiling and thought about a smile he could not stop thinking about. The second crack came from a phone call. One of his senior financial people, a meticulous man named Gerald Oakes, who had been with the organization for 11 years and who communicated primarily in understatement, called Darien into a meeting on a Tuesday morning. He placed a folder on the table between them that contained documentation Darien had never seen before. "I want you to look at this," Gerald said. "What is it?" Darien asked. "The 2019 accounts," Gerald replied. "The ones from the second quarter, around the shipping situation." Darien knew what the shipping situation was. The loss of 3 containers of significant value due to a combination of Port Authority scrutiny and a rival organization's interference had been one of the worst financial moments of his organization's recent history. The shortfall had been severe enough to create genuine structural problems, debts to certain associates, and gaps in liquidity that had required urgent management. He had managed it, or so he had believed. "Walk me through it," Darien said. Gerald walked him through it. The numbers told a story Darien had not been told at the time. The organization's recovery from the 2019 shortfall had been faster than it should have been, given the losses involved. The accounts showed bridging capital from sources Darien didn't recognize. It was structured carefully, moved through legitimate channels, and inserted with surgical precision into exactly the gaps that needed filling. "Where did this money come from?" Darien asked. Gerald was quiet for a moment. "It came from accounts registered to a holdings company," Gerald said. "A small one. I looked into it this morning. It traces back to a private investment portfolio." He paused. "The portfolio is registered to your wife." Darien looked at the folder. "To Nyla?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Gerald said. He sat with that for a moment. The sum involved was substantial, not catastrophic to a person of Nyla's background. Her family had old money, the kind that had been quietly managed across generations. But it was substantial enough that its movement would have required deliberate planning. This was not an impulse. This was not a simple gesture. This was a calculated intervention executed invisibly at a moment when the organization's vulnerability was real and the consequences of failure would have been severe. "She never mentioned this," Darien said. "No," Gerald agreed. "She did not." He took the folder home. He went through the accounts himself, which took most of the night. By the time he was finished, the sun was coming up over the park, and Celeste was still asleep in the bedroom. Darien was sitting at his office desk with the financial documentation spread in front of him, and a feeling in his chest that had no clean name. She had saved him. She had saved the organization he had always treated as the center of his universe, the enterprise that had justified every sacrifice and every absence. Every evening he had canceled, every conversation he had not had, and every time she had stood at the edge of his attention waiting for him to turn around. And she had saved it in secret and said nothing and expected nothing. He thought about the smile. He could not stop thinking about the smile. The captains came to him one by one over the following weeks, not together. There was no coordinated disclosure. It seemed to happen naturally, as though word had spread through the organization that certain truths were now allowable. Each man who came to Darien's office came with something specific, and came with the careful manner of someone not entirely sure how the information would land. A captain named Torres, who had been with the organization for 15 years, sat across from Darien one afternoon and told him about the winter of 2020. It was a period when territorial conflicts with the Resnick family had made certain streets effectively ungovernable. 3 of Torres's men had families in affected neighborhoods. Nyla had arranged for those families to be relocated temporarily, quietly, using a network of safe housing she apparently maintained through a series of community organizations she supported. Torres had assumed at the time that the arrangement had come through Darien. He had recently understood that it had not. "She told me not to mention it," Torres said. "She said you had enough on your plate." Darien said nothing. 2 weeks later, a veteran called Mace, a man so reserved that an entire conversation with him could pass in 4 sentences, came to Darien's office. He placed a written summary on the desk without ceremony and waited while Darien read it. The summary described a territorial negotiation that had taken place in the spring of 2021. A boundary dispute between the organization and a smaller crew from the Bronx had been moving steadily toward open conflict. The negotiation that had resolved it, a resolution that prevented what Mace estimated would have been a 3-week war and its attendant complications, had been conducted not by Darien's lieutenants, but by Nyla. She handled it over the course of 6 meetings that had taken place in restaurants and office lobbies, and once in a public library. "She speaks 3 languages," Mace said, as though this were a relevant clarification. "I know," Darien said. "One of the crew leaders from the Bronx, his first language is Portuguese," Mace explained. She spoke to him directly. Mace paused. He said afterward that no one on our side had ever spoken to him like he was a person worth talking to. Darien looked at the summary. "She never told me about any of this." "No," Mace said. He stood up. "I thought you should know." He left. Darien sat in his office with Mace's summary, Torres's account, and Gerald's financial documentation. He had the feeling that he was assembling belatedly a picture of something he had been standing too close to see for 7 years. Each piece fit against the others with a precision that was almost painful. She had been everywhere. She had been in every corner of his world, fixing what was broken, and shoring what was fragile, and smoothing what was rough. And she had done all of it with the same unhurried competence with which she picked up his dry cleaning and signed divorce papers without reading them. He poured himself a drink and didn't drink it. He looked at the city outside his window. He thought about the smile. He couldn't stop thinking about the smile. The security footage came from a building 2 blocks from the restaurant. His head of security, a careful man named Vincent Cross, who had been with the organization since before Darien took over, and who had the quality of someone who had seen most things, brought it to Darien's attention 6 weeks after the anniversary dinner. It was during a routine review of the ongoing search protocols. It showed Nyla leaving the restaurant. She walked out the front entrance into the October rain without hurrying. She had a small umbrella. Where she had produced it from, the footage could not say. She opened it as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She turned right and walked half a block. A car was waiting for her. Not a taxi. A dark-colored car parked at the curb. She got into it. The car pulled away. The driver was not one of their people. The car was not registered to anyone with a connection to the organization. The plates traced to a rental agency whose records showed the vehicle had been paid for in advance in cash by a name that matched no one in any database Cross had access to. What made the footage significant was not the car. It was the way she moved. Darien had watched it 3 times before he registered what his eyes were telling him. She walked out of that restaurant without looking back. Not once. She didn't pause on the sidewalk. She didn't stand in the rain for even a moment. She didn't look up at the building or down the street toward where his car would have been. She didn't do anything that suggested hesitation or second thoughts or the weight of a decision only just made. She walked to the car the way a person walks to a car they called 20 minutes ago. She had planned this. Not as a response to the dinner, not as a reaction to the divorce papers or the shock of the evening. She had planned this before she walked into that restaurant. She had sat across from him at table 12 in the burgundy dress she had bought for their 5th anniversary. She had signed those papers with a ballpoint pen from her clutch and smiled that smile. And every moment of it had been the final act of a plan she had been running for longer than he had been running his own. The realization hit him somewhere behind his sternum. He watched the footage a 4th time. "She's gone," Cross said. It wasn't new information, it was a confirmation. "She's gone," Darien agreed. He looked at the screen. The timestamp in the corner read 9:47 p.m., 23 minutes after she had signed the last page, and slid the folder back across the table and said, "I hope she gives you everything you think you're looking for." 23 minutes. He sat with that number the way you sit with something that won't resolve. "Where did the car go?" he asked. "We tracked it to a parking garage in Midtown," Cross said. "Lost the trail there. Cameras inside the structure were down. System malfunction, we think, though we can't confirm it was engineered." Cross paused. Nothing after that. Darien looked at the frozen image on the screen. Nyla at the passenger door, one hand on the handle. Her face turned slightly away from the camera, in the manner of someone who knew exactly where the cameras were. "She knew we'd pull this footage," he said. "That would be my read," Cross agreed. Darien stood. He walked to the window of his office. The city spread below him in the November dark, indifferent and glittering. Somewhere out there, somewhere that was not Manhattan, not the world she had inhabited for 7 years, Nyla Hartwell was living inside a plan she had made without him. The most controlled man in New York stood at his window and felt, for the first time in a long time, something that was not control. He felt afraid. Not of what she might do, not of exposure or vulnerability, or the operational implications of a woman who knew as much as she did, moving through the world outside his protection. He was afraid because he had watched her walk toward that waiting car, and he had finally understood what that smile meant, and what it had cost her to wear it, and what it said about the 7 years that had preceded it. The understanding had arrived the way most important things arrived in his life, late and at significant cost. Celeste was downstairs. She had called twice while he was in this meeting. She was planning something for the weekend, a dinner or a function or one of the events she attached herself to that required his presence as a kind of accessory. He would go. He would stand where he was supposed to stand and say what he was supposed to say, and come home and sit in his office and look at the footage again. He would search. He knew, standing at that window, that he would search for her, that he would dedicate the full machinery of everything he had to finding the woman who had signed those papers with a ballpoint pen and walked into the rain and disappeared as cleanly as smoke. He told himself it was because she was a liability. A woman who knew what she knew, moving in unknown space, constituted an operational risk. He looked at the frozen image on the screen. He didn't believe himself. The months that followed had the quality of a fever. He kept the search running while managing everything else. The organization, Celeste, the public life they were now openly conducting together. He was functional. He was even, by most measures, effective. He closed a significant business arrangement in January that had been 3 months in negotiation. He settled a territorial question that had been simmering since autumn. He attended the right events and made the right appearances, and returned home to Celeste's redecorated penthouse and the particular exhaustion of a man who is performing a life rather than living it. Celeste noticed nothing amiss. This told him something he did not want to know. In February, one of his investigators got a partial lead. A name, a city, a thread so thin it might have been nothing. The name was different. The city was far. The thread was thin. But Darien knew. He knew the way he had known the night she walked out of that restaurant, that something fundamental had already ended. The way you know a thing you've been refusing to know, standing suddenly in its full weight. He told Cross to verify the lead. He was already planning to go himself. The city was Seattle, and the woman his investigators had found there was living a life that bore no visible connection to Manhattan, or to the Voss syndicate, or to 7 years of a marriage that had ended in a restaurant in the October rain. But there was the smile. There was always the smile. And Darien Voss, who had built an empire on his ability to see clearly, who prided himself on facing things without flinching, was beginning to understand that in 7 years of marriage, he had never once truly seen his wife, and now she was gone. And the question that kept him awake through the February dark, that followed him through meetings and dinners, and every quiet moment of the constructed life he was living, the question wasn't where is she? The question was, what did I throw away? The lead came back verified on a Thursday. Cross placed the folder on Darien's desk without ceremony. A single photograph, a business name, an address in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. The photograph had been taken from a distance through a long lens, the way all surveillance photographs were taken when the subject was someone who had learned to watch for people watching her. It showed a woman crossing a street in daylight, carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder, her hair down and loose around her face, wearing a jacket Darien had never seen before. He looked at the photograph for a long time without picking it up. The business name on the file was Meridian Forward, a community investment company registered in Washington state 14 months ago. The stated purpose was financial support and mentorship for women rebuilding after crisis, job loss, domestic situations, economic collapse. The company had 3 employees in a small office on the second floor of a building that also housed a legal aid clinic and a nonprofit focused on housing assistance. 14 months ago, Darien did the arithmetic without wanting to. 14 months ago was August. 7 months before the anniversary dinner. 7 months before the leather folder and the ballpoint pen and the smile he could not stop seeing when he closed his eyes at 2 in the morning. She had started building her exit before he had finished planning his. She's using a different name, Cross said from the doorway. Elena Ward. Clean documents, not perfect, but solid. Whoever helped her build the identity knew what they were doing. Who helped her, Darien asked. We don't know yet. Find out. Yes, sir. Cross left. Darien sat with the photograph. Outside his office, the penthouse had the sounds of Celeste moving through her morning. The particular rhythm of her which he had memorized without meaning to, the way you memorize things that exist in your immediate space, whether you want to or not. She was on the phone. Her voice carried through the closed door in fragments. Something about a lunch. Something about an event in March. Something that made her laugh. The specific laugh she used when she was performing for an audience of one. He looked at the photograph. He booked a flight to Seattle that afternoon. He didn't tell Celeste where he was going. He told his assistant he had business on the West Coast and would be back by the weekend. He took Cross and one other man and no one else. He sat in the back of a town car to the airport with his hands in his lap, his jaw set, and the photograph in the inside pocket of his jacket, exactly where the leather folder had been 5 months ago. The flight was 4 hours and 40 minutes. He didn't sleep. Seattle was gray and cold and wet in a way that was completely different from New York's cold, less aggressive, more patient. The rain came down not in Manhattan's hard vertical sheets, but in a fine diffuse mist that settled on everything and made the city look like a photograph that hadn't fully developed. The waterfront smelled like salt and diesel. The streets in Capitol Hill were lined with coffee shops, used bookstores, and the particular species of small business that survives, because the people running it would rather be doing this than anything else. Darien stood across the street from the building that housed Meridian Forward and watched the second-floor windows for 40 minutes before Cross touched his arm. She comes in around 9, Cross said, leaves between 5 and 6, walks when the weather holds, takes the bus when it doesn't. She doesn't have a car. Registered to the company, doesn't use it often. Darien looked at the second-floor windows. A light was on up there. He could see movement behind the glass, shapes, nothing distinct. The man in the photograph, Darien said. Cross knew which photograph he meant. There had been a second one in the folder, taken the same day as the first. Nyla on a rooftop space above the building, and beside her, a man Darien didn't recognize. Tall, dark-haired. The posture of someone who had spent time in situations requiring physical self-possession. Elias Mercer, Cross said. Former military, search and rescue mostly. He runs a training program out of a facility near Tacoma now. He's been in Seattle about 8 months. They met through a community organization she's connected to. What kind of connection? Darien asked. Friendly. He volunteers with one of her partner organizations. They have coffee sometimes, lunch occasionally. Cross paused. Nothing confirmed beyond that. Darien looked at the building. He looks at her like something's confirmed, Darien said. Cross said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. They watched the building until 9:15, when the street door opened and Nyla came out. Elena Ward, the woman in the file, the woman in the photograph, wearing a gray coat, carrying a coffee cup, and moving with the unhurried purpose that was so specifically hers that something in Darien's chest shifted without permission. She turned left and walked toward the building entrance, and then she stopped. She stopped because she had seen him. The distance between them was maybe 30 feet. Enough space that she could have pretended not to see, could have continued moving, could have chosen not to acknowledge what was standing across the street in the Seattle mist. She stood for a moment, just a moment. The coffee cup held steady in one hand, her face giving away nothing visible from this distance. And then she crossed the street toward him. She stopped 4 feet away. How long have you been in the city? She asked. Her voice was the same, exactly the same. Since last night, he said. She nodded once, looked at Cross, then back at Darien. You found me. It took a while. It was supposed to. A car moved through the intersection behind her. The mist pressed down on everything. She looked at him with the same quality of attention she had always brought to looking at him. Total, unrushed, reading something he couldn't see. And he felt, standing on that sidewalk in a city that was not his, the particular discomfort of being fully seen by someone who had already decided what they were looking at. I'm not going back, she said simply. Without drama. I know. Then why are you here? He didn't have a clean answer for that. He had reasons. The financial documentation, the accounts, the things Torres and Mace had told him. The footage of her walking to the waiting car with her face slightly angled away from the camera. But the reasons were not the same thing as the answer, and she would have known the difference. I need to understand some things, he said. Some things. She looked at him. That's vague, Darien. Can we talk somewhere? She was quiet for a moment. The coffee cup steamed faintly in the cold air. She looked past him briefly, at Cross and the other man standing a respectful distance back. There was something in her expression when she looked at them. Not fear, not irritation. Something closer to tiredness. There's a place 2 blocks down, she said. I'll give you an hour. The coffee shop was small and warm and smelled like roasting beans and wet wool. They sat at a table near the back window. Cross and the other man stayed outside. Nyla set her cup down, folded her hands on the table, and waited with the patience of someone who had learned that waiting was its own form of leverage. The 2019 accounts, Darien said. Something moved across her face. Brief. Gone before he could name it. Gerald found them, she said. Yes, I wondered when that would happen. She looked out the window. I assumed it would be sooner. Why didn't you tell me? Darien asked. She looked back at him. Would you have let me do it if I'd asked? He didn't answer. You would have said no, she said. You would have said you had it handled. You would have said you didn't need it. And then the organization would have been in serious structural trouble by March of that year. And certain people you owe significant loyalty to would have begun to question whether the Voss syndicate was still a viable enterprise. She said all of this the way she said most things, without heat, without the particular satisfaction of someone proving a point. So I didn't ask, she added. That was my decision to make, and you would have made the wrong one. The words were not harsh. They were just accurate, and the accuracy of them was its own kind of brutality. Darien looked at her across the small table and felt the strangeness of this. 7 years of marriage distilled into a coffee shop in Seattle. Her hands folded on the table, the same face, the same voice, A completely different life behind her eyes. Torres told me about the families, he said. The 2020 relocations. Torres talks too much. Mace came in with documentation about the Bronx negotiation. Mace definitely talks too much. A brief thing that was almost humor crossed her face and vanished. What do you want me to say, Darien? That I helped where I could. Yes, I did. That was never the problem. Then what was the problem? She looked at him. You really don't know, she said. It was not a question, not contempt. It was something closer to a sorrow that had already been processed and set down somewhere she didn't have to carry anymore. Tell me. You stopped seeing me, she said. Not all at once. It happened the way most things happen. Gradually, then completely. I became part of the furniture, useful furniture maybe. Furniture you maintained because it functioned. But you stopped. She paused, not searching for words, just deciding which ones to use. You stopped asking about anything. What I thought, what I needed, what I was doing while you were running the organization I was quietly helping keep afloat. She picked up her coffee, set it back down without drinking. I don't think you were cruel. I don't think you intended it. I think you got very good at the life you were living, and I became background noise in it. I would have changed, he said. The look she gave him was not unkind. No, she said, you wouldn't have. Not then. You're saying it now because now you know what was happening. But Darien, knowing what I did doesn't change the fact that you were planning to leave me for 14 months, while I was protecting your organization without being asked. Those two things existed at the same time. That's who we were. He sat with that. Outside the window, the mist was thickening toward actual rain. A woman walked past with two children, one on each hand. The coffee shop murmured around them, other people's conversations, a barista calling a name, the hiss of a machine. I ended things with Celeste, he said. Nyla looked at him. That's not why I'm telling you, he said, because her expression suggested she thought it might be. I didn't come here for that. Then why did you come here? The question sat between them. He looked at her hands on the table. He had known those hands for 7 years. He knew the small scar on the left index finger from a cooking incident in the 2nd year of their marriage. He knew the way she held a pen. He knew exactly the quality of her grip on the leather folder in the moment before she signed the divorce papers without reading them. I came because I needed to know if I lost something I didn't understand, he said. Or something I understood and threw away anyway. She was very still. Which is it? He asked. Both, she said quietly, at different times. The rain started. It touched the window softly. The Seattle kind. No drama in it. Nyla looked out at it for a moment. And when she looked back, her expression had settled into something that wasn't cold, but was definitely closed. A door that had been opened a few inches and was now gently, firmly returned to its frame. I have a 9:30 meeting, she said. Nyla. Elena, she corrected quietly. It hit him harder than a raised voice would have. Elena, he said, and the name felt wrong in his mouth in a way that was its own kind of information. I'm not finished. I know you're not. She stood, picking up her coffee. But I am. She looked at him one more time with those steady dark eyes that had always read him more clearly than he wanted to be read. You should go home, Darien. You have things to run. She walked out. He sat at the table and looked at her empty chair, listened to the rain on the window, and didn't go home. He stayed in Seattle. He knew it was the wrong decision. Cross said nothing, which meant Cross thought it was the wrong decision. He checked into a hotel near the waterfront and sent Cross back to the city with instructions to manage things. He kept the other man, whose name was Garrett, 26 years old, reliable and quiet, as minimal security presence, because showing up to a coffee shop conversation with 2 guards was already more than the situation warranted, and he was trying not to make things worse. He watched the office building from different positions over the next 2 days. Not surveillance exactly. Or, yes, surveillance, but the kind that had no operational objective, which made it something else. He watched her arrive in the mornings and leave in the evenings. He watched her stop to talk to a woman on the steps of the building next door, the conversation lasting 15 minutes. Nyla's whole body was oriented toward the other woman in a way that suggested full attention. He watched her eat lunch alone on a bench near the waterfront on a day when the rain held off. She was reading something on her phone, occasionally looking out at the water with an expression he couldn't read from a distance. She looked like someone who had learned to occupy her own life completely. On the second evening, Elias Mercer appeared. He came from the direction of the bus stop, tall, easy in his movement, wearing a jacket that had seen use. Nyla was coming out of the building at the same time, and they met on the steps with the naturalness of two people who had met on those steps before. He said something. She laughed. A real laugh, full and unguarded. The kind Darien couldn't remember being the cause of in the last few years of their marriage. Mercer held the door for a woman coming out behind her. He carried Nyla's bag when she shifted it on her shoulder, taking it without being asked, in the manner of someone who had learned her habits. Darien stood across the street in the Seattle dusk and watched a man treat his wife with the casual, attentive consideration of someone who thought she was worth paying attention to. His hands were in his jacket pockets. He was aware of them, of the effort required not to do anything with them. Garrett appeared at his shoulder. "Sir, not now. Sir, we have a problem." Garrett's voice had changed register. Lower, more careful. The register that meant the problem was not administrative. "I got a call from Cross 20 minutes ago. There are people in the city asking about your location." Darien turned from the window. "What people?" "Cross thinks it's Renner." The name landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Victor Renner led the organization that had been, for the last 18 months, the primary competitive pressure on the Voss syndicate's interests in Lower Manhattan. There had been 3 incidents in the fall, 2 involving territory, 1 involving a shipment that had been managed without escalating to open conflict. Barely managed. The situation was a container held under pressure, the lid maintained by the mutual understanding that open war was expensive for everyone. "He knows I'm here," Darien said. "Cross thinks he's known for 2 days. How? Unknown. Could be a leak. Could be someone tracked the flight." Darien looked back across the street. Nyla and Mercer had moved down the steps and were walking away from the building. Not toward the bus stop, toward the waterfront, his bag over his shoulder and hers over his. The two of them moving at the same pace, with the ease of people who had learned each other's rhythm. He watched them until they turned a corner. "Renner wouldn't come here for a conversation," Darien said. "No," Garrett agreed, "he wouldn't." The rain started again. Darien stood in it for a moment without moving, doing the mathematics of the situation, the exposure, the distance from his people, the available options, and underneath the mathematics, running parallel to it, a different calculation. Renner knew Darien was in Seattle. If Renner was the kind of man to use that knowledge operationally, and Darien knew exactly what kind of man Renner was, then the question of what Renner might know or guess about why Darien was in Seattle had its own implications. She was in this city. She was 2 blocks away, and she didn't know. "Get Cross back here," Darien said. "All of them. Tonight." "And the other situation?" Garrett asked. He looked at the corner where Nyla and Mercer had disappeared. "I'll handle it," Darien said. He didn't know yet what handling it would cost. He didn't know that the choice he made in the next 12 hours would be the choice everything else would turn on. That there was a door he was about to walk through from which there was no return to the man he had been, before he walked into a coffee shop and heard his wife tell him with perfect quietness that she was finished. He walked back toward the hotel through the rain with Garrett 2 steps behind him and his phone already in his hand. And for the first time in his adult life, Darien Voss was afraid of what he was capable of doing to the people closest to him. He was afraid of what it meant that he was only now standing in a city that wasn't his, beginning to understand it. He was still standing in the rain when his phone rang. Not Cross, not Garrett. A number he didn't recognize. A Seattle area code. No name attached. He answered it because, in his business, unknown numbers from unknown locations carried their own species of urgency. "Mr. Voss," the voice was male. Unhurried, carrying the particular flatness of someone who had learned to remove all effect from their speech as a professional discipline. "You should come inside. You've been standing in the rain for 11 minutes, and it's drawing attention." Darien didn't move. "Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching the same street you've been watching. Room 412 of the Harborview Hotel. That's where you're staying, correct. I'll be in the lobby bar in 20 minutes. I'd suggest you come alone. The line went dead. Garrett was already at his shoulder. Sir, did you catch the number? Running it now. Don't bother. Darien put the phone in his pocket and started walking. It'll be clean. The man in the lobby bar was in his 50s, gray at the temples, wearing a jacket that fit too well to be accidental. He was drinking club soda, and he had chosen a table with sight lines to both entrances. That told Darien everything he needed to know about the man's professional background before a word was exchanged. Darien sat down. He didn't order anything. Victor Renner sent you, Darien said. The man smiled, not warmly. It was the smile of someone acknowledging a correct answer, in a context where the answer doesn't help you. Mr. Renner is aware you're in Seattle. Yes. That wasn't the question. No. The man set down his glass with a small, precise movement. My name is Caulfield. I've been in Seattle for 3 weeks. I'm here because Mr. Renner has an interest in the situation that brought you here. What situation is that? Caulfield looked at him with the patient expression of someone who had been told to deliver information and intended to deliver it completely regardless of how the recipient reacted. Your wife? He said. Or your former wife as of approximately 5 months ago, Elena Ward, as she's currently known. Mr. Renner has been aware of her location for approximately 2 months. Something cold moved through Darien's chest. He kept his face where it was. Why? He asked. Because she contacted us. The lobby bar continued its business around them. A couple at the far end, a bartender polishing glasses, the ambient sound of a hotel doing what hotels do. Darien sat with the sentence Caulfield had just placed in front of him and felt it restructure something in the way he understood the last 5 months. You're going to want to clarify that, Darien said. His voice was level. He was aware of the effort required to keep it there. 6 weeks after your divorce was finalized, Caulfield said, Miss Hartwell reached out to Mr. Renner's organization through an intermediary. She offered documentation, financial records, operational details, communications, material spanning approximately 4 years of the Voss Syndicate's activities. In exchange, she requested a specific form of protection and the resources to establish her current identity and enterprise. Darien looked at him. She built Meridian forward with Renner's money, he said. A portion of it. She's repaid most of it. Mr. Renner wants me to be clear that she's not an ongoing asset. The arrangement was transactional and finite. She provided the material, received the support, and the operational relationship ended there. But Renner kept the documentation. Of course! Of course! Darien looked at the table, at Caulfield's glass of club soda, at his own hands flat on the surface in front of him, because they needed to be somewhere he could see them. He thought about the financial records Gerald had found, the accounts she had used to save the organization in 2019. She had known exactly where those accounts were, what they contained, how the money had moved. She had been inside every significant financial decision of the last 4 years in ways he had not understood until 3 weeks ago. She hadn't just left. She had armed herself on the way out. Why is Renner telling me this now? Darien asked. Because you're here, Caulfield said simply. Mr. Renner is a practical man. He'd like to avoid a situation where your presence in Seattle creates complications. He wants you to understand the landscape clearly before you make decisions that affect it. And if I decide the landscape needs to change. Caulfield picked up his glass. Then Mr. Renner would be obligated to act on the documentation he holds, which would create significant problems for the Voss Syndicate's relationships with several municipal entities and at least 2 federal oversight bodies. He drank and set the glass down. He'd prefer not to do that. It's messy, but he will. Darien stood up. Tell Renner I heard him, he said. Mr. Voss. Caulfield's voice stopped him without raising. There's one more thing. The man she's spending time with, Mercer. He's not what he appears to be, either. You should ask yourself how a former military rescue pilot ends up in Seattle 8 months after your divorce, working with the same community organizations as your former wife. He paused. Mr. Renner thought you'd want to know. Darien walked out of the lobby bar without looking back. He went to his room, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the wall for a long time. The math of it assembled itself without his permission, piece by piece. The way evidence assembles itself, when you've been trained to see patterns. When pattern recognition is so deep in your operating system that it continues running even when the pattern is about you, even when what you're seeing is the architecture of your own blindness. She had started Meridian Forward 14 months before the anniversary dinner. She had contacted Renner 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. She had provided documentation covering 4 years, which meant she had been collecting it for 4 years. While she was protecting his families and negotiating his territorial conflicts and saving his organization from bankruptcy, she had been building a parallel record. Careful, systematic, the way she did everything. Gathering exactly the kinds of activities that would matter to the specific people most capable of using them against him. She had sat across from him at 1,000 dinners and stood beside him at 100 events. She had been, simultaneously, the most valuable asset his organization had and the most careful threat it faced. Both things at the same time. He picked up his phone and called Cross. "Tell me about Elias Mercer," he said when Cross answered. "Full background. Don't give me the summary." Cross was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of someone accessing information they had already gathered but hadn't been asked to present. "Former Air Force," Cross began. 8 years, search and rescue specialization. Honorable discharge 4 years ago. Since then, he's been operating a civilian rescue training program. Certified instructor, multiple credentials, clean record. Another pause. His sister runs a women's support organization in Portland. It has a formal partnership with Meridian Forward. That's the documented connection. His sister, Darien said. Yes. The sisters' organization and Meridian Forward have been formally partnered since a brief pause. Since 16 months ago. 16 months ago. 2 months before Nyla started building the exit. Before the anniversary dinner, before the divorce papers, before the leather folder and the ballpoint pen. Cross, Darien said. Sir. Who set up the documentation Nyla provided to Renner, who built her cover identity. The silence this time was longer. Cross was a careful man. He didn't offer conclusions before he was ready to defend them. I can't confirm that without more investigation. Best current read, someone with operational experience. The identity construction is not amateur. The financial channels she used to move the Renner money into Meridian Forward are layered in ways that suggest professional guidance. Cross stopped. The layering looks similar to some structures we've used ourselves, historically. Someone from inside, Darien said, or someone who studied how we work closely enough to approximate it. Darien ended the call. He sat in the hotel room with the rain outside the window and the weight of the thing assembling itself in his chest. Not quite rage, not quite grief. Something that combined the structural qualities of both and was worse than either because it had no clean target. She had done what she had done in response to what he had done, and the logic of it was immaculate. And the immaculate logic of it was the most devastating part. He thought about her on the rooftop with Mercer. Mercer carrying her bag on the steps. Mercer and his sister's organization 16 months ago. She hadn't done this alone. She had been helped, and the help had been put in place before she needed it, which meant someone had seen what was coming before Darien had, which meant that in the ecosystem of his own life, he had been the least informed person in the room. He stood up. He needed to move. He paced the room. 4 steps to the window, 4 steps back. The particular pacing of a man who has trained himself out of outward agitation and is now running up against its limits. The rain on the glass, the harbor lights below. Seattle, going about its patient northwestern business, indifferent to the fact that a man's understanding of the last 7 years was being rebuilt from the ground up in room 412. He stopped pacing. He put his jacket back on and left the room. Garrett was in the hallway. I need to find Mercer, Darien said, separately from her tonight. Sir, Cross said. I know what Cross said. Find him. Garrett found him in 40 minutes. Mercer was at a bar near the waterfront, not drinking heavily, nursing something amber. Sitting at the end of the bar with the body language of a man comfortable in his own company. Darien came in and sat 2 stools down. The bartender came, and Darien ordered whatever was on draft and waited. Mercer looked at him, not with surprise. With the careful assessment of someone cataloging a new variable in a situation he had already mapped. Mr. Voss, Mercer said, Darien looked at him. You know who I am, I know who you are? Then you know why I'm here. I have a reasonable idea. Mercer's voice was even, Pacific Northwest even, unhurried. The voice of mountains and open water and distances that made Manhattan seem claustrophobic. You found her. You want to understand what you're looking at. What am I looking at? Mercer turned his glass slowly on the bar surface. A woman who made a plan and executed it. That's what you're looking at. And where do you fit in that plan? I'm a friend. Your sister's organization partnered with Meridian Forward 16 months ago. Mercer's expression didn't change. A small acknowledgement in his eyes. Not surprise, just the recognition of someone noting that a piece has moved to where he expected it to move. Yes. My sister runs a good organization. Elena's is better. They collaborate well. You've known her for 16 months. I've known of her for 16 months. I've known her for 8. He looked at Darien directly. There was something in the look that was not aggressive, but was absolutely without deference. The look of a man who had been in situations that calibrated his sense of what was actually dangerous and had made his assessment. I know what you're trying to figure out. Whether I was part of the original setup, whether there's something there that threatens your interests. He picked up his glass. I'm not going to have that conversation with you. What I'll tell you is that the woman you're looking for is not the woman you were married to. Not because she changed. She was always this person. Because you never looked. Who did? Darien's hand tightened on the bar. You don't know anything about my marriage. Quiet. The quiet that people who knew him well had learned to read correctly. Mercer seemed to read it correctly too. He set his glass down and turned on the stool to face Darien more directly, in the manner of someone who had decided to say the thing clearly rather than around its edges. I know she worked for your organization without title or compensation for 7 years, Mercer said. I know she kept 3 of your people's families out of harm's way during a conflict you were too busy managing to notice had reached the residential level. I know she prevented what your own men told her would have been a significant territorial war by spending 6 weeks in a language and a context you had never bothered to learn. And I know she left you documentation that could flatten everything you've built. And she gave it to someone else instead of a federal agent, because even after everything, she was trying to limit your exposure. He held Darien's gaze. She gave Renner the minimum, enough to protect herself, not enough to end you. Darien sat very still. She could have gone to a federal agent, Mercer said again, more quietly. She didn't. That's not nothing. The bar moved around them. Someone put money in a jukebox somewhere. The bartender refilled something at the other end. Darien sat with what Mercer had just placed in front of him and felt it settle into the architecture of everything else he'd learned in the last weeks. And what it built was not a picture of a woman who had betrayed him. It was a picture of a woman who had made the smallest possible betrayal consistent with her own survival. She had made it while still, in some residual way, protecting a man who had given her no reason to. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Cross, he answered. We have a problem, Cross said. No preamble. Renner, not Renner. Renner's a problem, but he's contained for now. A pause. Cross calibrating how to say what he was about to say, which meant what he was about to say was significant. Someone leaked your location to a different party, not Renner's people. We've been trying to identify the source for the last 3 hours. Who's the party? Vasquez. The name hit him like a door opening in a wall he thought was solid. Emilio Vasquez ran an operation out of Chicago that had been, until 18 months ago, a peripheral but stable presence in the broader organizational landscape. 18 months ago, the Voss syndicate had moved on a joint shipping arrangement that had effectively edged Vasquez's people out of a significant revenue stream. It had been business. Vasquez had made clear, through the appropriate channels, that he didn't see it as exclusively business. Vasquez is in Seattle, Darien said. 3 of his people are. We made them an hour ago. They're positioned around the building where your ex-wife's office is. Everything in Darien went cold and then very, very clear. She doesn't know, he said. No indication she knows. He was already off the stool. He looked at Mercer once, and Mercer had read his face, was already standing. That particular readiness in him that came from 8 years of pulling people out of situations they hadn't anticipated. Her office, Darien said to Mercer. Not a question. Mercer was already moving. They came out of the bar into the wet street, and Darien called Cross with his phone to his ear. Garrett fell in from wherever he had been waiting, and the three of them moved at the deliberate pace of men who know that running draws attention, and attention is currently the problem. How long have Vasquez's people been on the building? Darien asked into the phone. Since approximately 9 p.m. They've been static, watching, not moving yet. She might still be inside. Lights on the second floor. He looked at Mercer. Is she still in there this late? Sometimes. When she has a deadline, Mercer's jaw was set. She doesn't lock the street door until she leaves. They were a block away. Darien scanned the street automatically. The particular visual parsing of someone trained to read space for threat. He spotted two of them before Cross finished describing their positions. A man in a gray jacket near the building entrance, too still for someone standing outside in the Seattle cold without a specific purpose. And a second man across the street at the corner, facing the wrong direction for a person waiting for anything ordinary. Cross, I have 2 more men 7 minutes out. Too long. I know. He looked at the building. Second floor light, burning yellow against the dark. Nyla up there with her files and her coffee, and her completely parallel life, not knowing that the man she had once been married to was standing in the rain below her. With the consequences of his professional history arranged around her building like a net. Vasquez didn't want documentation. Vasquez wanted the kind of leverage that you held over a man, not in a folder, but in a situation. The kind where a phone call came through and a voice on the other end told you what was going to happen to someone unless you made a specific decision. Vasquez was old-fashioned in that way. He believed in human leverage because human leverage was the kind you could see working in real time. He had looked at the landscape. Darien in Seattle, alone, away from his people in a city he didn't control. And he had seen an opportunity that was almost elegant. Darien looked at the 2 visible men and did the calculation of what he had. Himself, Garrett, and a former Air Force rescue specialist who was currently standing at his shoulder with the expression of someone who had already done the same calculation and reached the same conclusion about the available options. There's a service entrance on the north side, Mercer said quietly. I've used it. Of course you have. She uses it when she works late. Feels safer than the front street after dark. Darien looked at the man in the gray jacket. If we go in the service entrance, the one at the corner has a partial sight line. Partial. Partial is better than full. He looked at Garrett. You and I take the front, make it look like nothing. 2 men going into a building. He looked at Mercer. You know the layout up there. Yes. North entrance. Get to her before she decides to leave. Mercer didn't argue. He didn't ask for clarification about why he should be taking direction from the ex-husband of the woman he was trying to protect. He simply moved. Around the side of the building, his footsteps quiet on the wet pavement, his jacket dark enough to absorb the light. Darien looked at Garrett. Front door, he said, slowly. They walked toward the building entrance with the manufactured casualness of 2 men who belonged there. And the man in the gray jacket watched them come with eyes that were making their own calculations. Darien kept his gaze ahead, his hands visible. He felt the specific species of clarity that arrived in his body when the situation had simplified down to physics, weight, distance, and timing. There was nothing left to decide except the execution. The gray-jacketed man stepped slightly away from the wall. Help you, he said. Office on 2, Darien said, not stopping, picking up documents. Building's closed. My coworker has a key. Garrett was already at the door. Darien kept moving, and the gray-jacketed man made the decision half a second too late. His hand went to his jacket, the calculation shifting in his eyes. But by then Darien was through the door was closing, and the man on the corner across the street was moving. Inside. Stairwell. Second floor. Darien took the stairs at a controlled run and emerged into a narrow hallway that smelled like old carpet and office supplies. The specific staleness of a building that had been repurposed from something else. One door at the end was lit from underneath. He was 10 feet from it when it opened. Nyla stood in the doorway with her coat already on and her bag over her shoulder, clearly about to leave for the evening. She saw him first, Then she saw his expression, and something happened in her face. The composure shifting, not breaking, but adjusting. The way a structure adjusts when the load it's carrying changes suddenly. "Darien, don't go out the front," he said. "What?" "There are men outside. Vasquez's people. They're not here for me." He watched her face process it. "They're here to get to me through you." She stared at him. Behind her in the office, he heard footsteps. And then Mercer came through the interior door from the north stairwell, slightly winded. He took in the hallway with a rapid assessment that settled when it landed on Nyla, standing unharmed in the doorway. She looked at Mercer, then back at Darien. "How many?" she said. Her voice was steady. "Of course it was. 3 confirmed, possibly a 4th we haven't located. Because of you being here." "Yes." She held his gaze for a moment, and that moment was everything she hadn't said in the coffee shop. The compressed weight of the choice he had made by coming to Seattle, by inserting himself back into her orbit and carrying his world back into hers like a contagion. He saw her understand it completely, and he saw her set it aside, because she was someone who dealt with what was in front of her before she dealt with what it meant. "Elias," she said without looking away from Darien. "I know a way out," Mercer said. "Basement connects to the parking structure next door. Then we go." She looked at Darien. "You should know. Whatever's about to happen, this is the last time your problems are my problems. Do you understand me? Nyla, do you understand me?" He looked at her in the hallway of the building she had built with her own design and Renner's money, and 7 years of learning how to survive the specific life she had lived with him. And he understood with a clarity that was almost physical that he was looking at the last moment of a particular kind of permission. After tonight, whatever she chose, she would choose it from a position he couldn't influence. "Yes," he said, "I understand." "Then move," she said, and walked past him toward the stairwell. And Darien Voss, who had not taken direction from anyone in a very long time, turned and he followed her. That was the fact of it, stripped down to its simplest form. Darien Voss, who had not followed anyone anywhere in 15 years, turned in that hallway and followed his former wife toward a stairwell in a building she had built without him, in a city he had no claim to, with a man he didn't trust at the point position, and a threat he had imported closing in from the street below. The basement smelled like concrete and standing water, and the particular cold that lives below ground level, regardless of what the weather is doing above it. Mercer moved through it with the confidence of someone who had memorized the space. Not cautiously, not hesitantly. Moving with the deliberate efficiency of a man whose professional life had been built around extracting people from places they shouldn't be in. He hit the door to the connecting structure without slowing and held it, and Nyla went through, and Darien went through behind her, and Garrett came last. The parking structure was 3 levels. Empty at this hour except for a handful of vehicles on the first level. Residents, probably, or people working late in the adjoining offices. The fluorescent lighting was the kind that made everything look clinical and slightly wrong. Their footsteps on concrete echoed in ways that gave the space the quality of something that could hear you. Mercer moved them to the east stairwell, down 1 level toward a secondary exit that opened onto a side street running parallel to the building Nyla's office was in. "My car's on level 2, Mercer said, keeping his voice low. "If they're watching the building, they may have a man on the structure." "They have 4 people, Darien said. 2 on the office building. If they split the other 2, 1 stays on the primary exit, 1 covers secondary positions." He thought about it in motion, calculating while he walked. "They're not expecting us to already be out. How long before they know? The man on the front door saw us go in. If he's been trying to reach the others, maybe 5 minutes ago. If he went in himself to check." Darien looked at Garrett. "Did he follow us in?" "Negative. He held position. Then he's called it in and they're repositioning." Darien checked his watch without breaking stride. 3 minutes, maybe 4. Nyla was walking between them, and she hadn't spoken since the hallway. He could see her in his peripheral vision, her jaw set, her eyes moving, doing her own assessment of the space. She had her phone in her hand. She was not panicking. He had never seen her panic, and the fact of that, which he had taken for granted across 7 years of marriage as simply the way she was, registered now as something he had failed to understand. She wasn't calm because she was passive. She was calm because she was always thinking. "Who is Vasquez?" she said. "Not to anyone specific to the situation." "Chicago," Darien said. "Shipping dispute 18 months ago. I moved on something he considered his. And he's here because you're here." "Yes." "And I'm involved because you came to Seattle." "Yes." She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The economy of it was devastating in its simplicity. He had found her, and in finding her, had pointed something dangerous in her direction. And now they were moving through a parking structure in the Seattle dark, and this was, in the most direct possible way, his level 2. Mercer's vehicle was a dark gray pickup, backed in, the habit of someone who preferred to leave quickly, at the far end of the row. They were 20 feet from it when Darien heard the stairwell door behind them. He heard it open. Not close, open. The specific sound of a door being pushed from the other side. He said, "Down," in a voice that carried no volume and maximum authority, and Nyla dropped without hesitation. Not to the ground, but behind the nearest vehicle, a sedan, quick and low and already moving laterally. Garrett was pulling left, and Darien was pulling right. The man who had come through the stairwell door was already raising something, and the fluorescent light caught the shape of it, and Darien moved, not away, toward. The distance was 12 feet, and he covered it faster than the man had time to correct for. The angle was wrong, the trajectory not what someone standing at 12 feet was supposed to do. He hit the man's gun hand first, using both of his own hands. The weapon discharged once into the concrete floor with a sound that was enormous in the enclosed space, the echo of it slamming back from every surface. The man was larger than Darien and younger, by maybe 10 years, but he had expected distance, and he had gotten the opposite, and that surprise was the margin. Darien drove him back into the stairwell door with his full weight. The man hit it hard, and the gun was on the floor. There was a moment, a specific moment, a breath and a half, where the outcome was entirely physical. Darien was not a man who lost physical encounters. 30 seconds, and the man was down. Garrett was there with the length of something from his jacket that served the necessary purpose. The gun was in Darien's hand, and he was breathing harder than he wanted to be. There was blood on his right hand from where the concrete had gotten it during the initial contact. Nyla was standing behind the sedan, watching. Not frozen, watching. The same way she watched everything. With full attention, taking inventory. "Elias," she said very quietly. Mercer was at the truck, already had it unlocked. "Now," he said. They went. Quick did. Mercer drove without being told where to drive. He knew this city, its rhythms, the roads that moved through it without announcing themselves. He took side streets south, then doubled back east. It was the kind of routing that wasn't about getting somewhere fast, but about ensuring nothing was following. Darien sat in the passenger seat with the borrowed gun in his lap and his bleeding hand wrapped in something Garrett had produced from somewhere. He watched the mirrors and the streets and didn't speak for the first 3 minutes. Nyla was in the back seat with Garrett. "Where are we going?" she said. "Somewhere they don't know about," Mercer said. "That means what?" "Training facility, Tacoma. 40 minutes. He glanced at the mirror. "Unless someone wants to suggest something better." Nobody suggested something better. Darien's phone went off. "Cross," he answered. "Tell me," he said. "Vasquez's other 2 men were at the parking structure. One of them went in. I assume you've met. He's contained. The other one is unaccounted for. He was on the south side of the structure, and he dropped off our track when you went mobile." Cross paused. "Darien. Vasquez himself is in Seattle." Darien looked at the rain on the windshield. "Since when?" "We're reading it as tonight. He flew commercial into SeaTac, we think, under a travel name. One of our people spotted a match 40 minutes ago near the waterfront." Cross's voice carried the specific flatness of someone delivering information they would prefer not to be delivering. He doesn't send 4 people and come himself for a grab. This is personal. The shipping dispute was 18 months ago. The shipping dispute cost him 3 revenue streams and a 10-year partnership. It wasn't just money, a beat. He also lost a man. In the operational fallout, someone close to him. Darien hadn't known about the man. He noted with a clarity that the current situation sharpened, that there were things happening in the ecosystem of his professional life that had been happening without his full knowledge. And that gap in knowledge had costs, and some of those costs were currently in the back seat of a truck heading toward Tacoma. My people, he said. How long to get them here? 2 hours minimum. I have 4 people I can have on a plane tonight. Cross country, then ground transport. 2 hours is a long time. I know. What about local resources, working it? We have a contact here, but it's going to take time to activate, and I don't want to activate something I can't control in a city where we have no infrastructure. Work faster. He ended the call. Mercer was watching him from his peripheral. Brief glances. Road first, the assessment of someone calculating dependencies. How bad? Mercer said. Bad enough. I have people at the facility. Darien looked at him. What kind of people? Instructors, veterans, men who know how to handle a situation. He said it without drama, the flat statement of someone describing available equipment. My facility, my people, my city. You don't have infrastructure here. I do. The calculus of it was not complicated. Darien ran it in the time it took Mercer to take a corner. He didn't like the position it put him in. Dependent on a man he didn't know, in a city he didn't control, for the protection of a woman who had spent the last year building her life specifically outside his reach. He didn't like any of it. All right, he said. Mercer took the on-ramp south. The facility was outside Tacoma proper, a converted industrial property with a main building and 2 outbuildings set back from a service road behind a fence line that looked agricultural until you noticed the cameras. Mercer brought the truck through a gate with a code and parked behind the main building, out of sight line from the road. By the time they were out of the vehicle, there were 2 men coming out of the building's side entrance, both of them Mercer's age or younger. Both of them moving with the specific body language of people who knew something was wrong and were orienting themselves to it without being told. Mercer spoke to them briefly, too low for Darien to hear all of it. They nodded and moved, and the facility absorbed them. Nyla stood near the truck. She was looking at the building, her arms crossed, not against the cold, but the posture of someone drawing themselves in to think clearly. Her hair was wet from the parking structure. There was a small abrasion on her right forearm that she hadn't mentioned. Darien had noticed it when she moved under the fluorescent lights. She'd caught it on something when she went down behind the sedan. He walked to her. She looked at him coming, and something in her eyes said she was aware of the specific weight of this moment. The 2 of them standing in the dark outside a building in Tacoma. All the context stripped away, down to whatever was actually true. The arm, he said. She looked at it. It's fine. Let someone look at it. Darien. The way she said his name. Not sharp, but carrying a fatigue that was different from physical tiredness. Stop. I'm not. You're managing me. You've been managing everything for the last hour, and I understand that's what you do. That's what you're built for. But I am not one of your assets, and I am not someone you get to. She stopped herself, exhaled slowly. The rain was light here, barely registering. Tell me what we're dealing with, he told her. Vasquez, the shipping dispute. The man Vasquez had lost. Vasquez, in Seattle personally, which changed the nature of the operation from tactical to something that had the texture of a vendetta. She listened without interrupting. This was something she had always done. Received information completely before responding to it, without the interjections and redirections that most people inserted into a briefing to demonstrate they were following. She just listened, and when he was finished, she was quiet for a moment. He'll know you left the city, she said. He knows. He'll go to what you value. There's nothing here, he. Darien stopped. She looked at him. He'll stay here, she said, because you stayed here. The logic of it was ugly and exact. Vasquez didn't need to know the specifics of why Darien was in Seattle. He needed to know that Darien was still here after being exposed, which meant there was something here worth staying for, which meant that thing could be the pressure point. I should have left, Darien said. Yes. Nyla held his gaze. You should have. It was not cruel. It was just true. And the truth of it landed the way truth lands when it's too late to change the thing it's describing. Inside the facility, lights were moving. Mercer's people getting into position, the building waking up in the quiet way of people who knew what preparation looked like and went about it without needing to be loud. Garrett had moved to a position near the gate. Darien's hand throbbed under the wrapping. His phone rang again. Not cross. A number he didn't recognize, not the Seattle area code this time, he answered. Mr. Voss. A different voice from Caulfield's. Rougher, the Spanish of someone who had learned English as a second language and never lost the original architecture underneath it. I think you know who this is. Vasquez. Good. I want to keep this simple. The voice was even measured. The control of someone who had decided, before making the call, what he was going to say, and wasn't going to be moved from it by anything that happened on the other end. You took something from me. A man I trusted. You may not have known his specific value to me. I'm willing to believe that. But the outcome is the same regardless of your knowledge. I am here to collect an equivalent. You're not touching her, Darien said. The words came out in a register he hadn't used in a long time. Not the managed voice, not the controlled professional delivery. Something below that. Then come out. Simpler than Darien had expected. You, alone. The facility you're in. Yes, I know where you are. We've had 40 minutes. Come out, and we resolve this between us. And the woman goes back to her life, and I go back to mine. Darien looked at Nyla. She was watching him with an expression that told him she could read the contours of the conversation from his half of it. You'll let her go, Darien said. She's not relevant to me. She never was. This is about you, and if I come out, then we have a conversation about what you owe me. Darien said, give me 10 minutes. 5, Vasquez said, and hung up. Nyla said, you're not going out there. He has people outside. Then we deal with his people. Her voice had changed. The composure was still there, but something underneath it now. Something with heat in it. You're not walking out of this building because a man with a grudge told you to. That is not. She stopped, looked at him with the dark eyes he had known for 7 years and never fully understood. That is not what happens. Nyla, Elena, not right now. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Right now you're Nyla, and I'm telling you I'm not going to let someone use you as a mechanism. That's finished. Do you understand me? That is finished. She stared at him. The facility hummed around them. Generators, quiet movement, the specific alive quality of people getting ready for something. Mercer appeared in the side doorway. We have visual on 4 men outside the perimeter. 1 vehicle on the service road, dark SUV. They're not moving yet. Vasquez gave me 5 minutes, Darien said. 3 of those are gone, Mercer said. He looked at Darien with that level assessment. What do you want to do? Darien looked at the gate, at the service road beyond it, dark in the rain, at the situation he had built, piece by piece, choice by choice, over the last 18 months. The shipping deal that cost Vasquez a man, the 14 months of not seeing what was in front of him, the flight to Seattle, the hotel room, the coffee shop, the parking structure, all of it converging in this facility in the dark outside Tacoma. With his former wife standing 5 feet away, and a man outside who had decided that equivalent pain was the appropriate currency, he made a decision. Mercer, he said, your men, what are we working with? 4 instructors, all combat trained. 2 have weapons here, standard safety protocol for the facility. I have the weapon from the parking structure. Darien looked at Garrett. What are you carrying? Garrett opened his jacket. I have 4 men coming from the city, Darien said. 2 hours. We need to last 2 hours, or we need to end it before they get here. He looked at Mercer. Your facility, your ground. You know it better than he does. Mercer nodded once, the nod of someone who had been waiting to be asked. There's a reason I built this place where I built it, Mercer said. Sight lines, approach vectors, the fence layout. I know every inch of this property in the dark. He paused. I've run night extraction drills here 100 times. I know exactly which approach Vasquez's people will try to use if they come in. They'll come in, Darien said. The 5 minutes are up. As if in answer, the facility's perimeter lights, motion activated, mounted high on the fence post, came on, all of them simultaneously on the north side. Mercer said, East. They're coming east to draw attention north. He was already moving, back of the main building, now. Nyla moved. She moved without being told to, without waiting, heading for the interior of the building, because she had already assessed the geometry and understood what the interior offered that the exterior didn't. Darien watched her go and felt something lurch in his chest. The specific terror of a man who has understood too late, and with terrible completeness, exactly what he has been willing to lose. He turned toward the east fence with the borrowed weapon in his hand. He crossed the dark yard with Mercer on one side and Garrett on the other, and two of Mercer's men coming from the outbuilding to the south. The rain came down with the patient indifference of weather that has no stake in outcomes. And somewhere outside the perimeter, Emilio Vasquez was making his own calculation about what the next 60 seconds were going to cost everyone involved. Darien Voss ran the last 40 feet to the east fence in the dark, took a position, and waited. He felt his heartbeat in his split hand and in his temples, and thought about a smile in a Manhattan restaurant 7 months ago, and what it had cost the woman wearing it, and what it was going to cost him too. The first man came over the east fence at the corner post. Darien saw him before he landed. The shape of him against the lesser dark of the sky, the specific silhouette of someone trained to move over obstacles quickly and quietly. And he was neither quick enough nor quiet enough, because Mercer had built this facility with the knowledge that fences are suggestions and the real perimeter is the ground beyond them. There were motion sensors embedded in the gravel along the inside of the fence line, invisible in the dark. And when the first man's boots hit the gravel, they triggered a light in the main building that told Mercer's people exactly where the breach was before the man had taken 2 steps. Darien was already there. He took the man down without the weapon, close enough that using it would have announced their position to everyone outside the fence. And Darien was not ready to announce their position yet. It was fast, and it was ugly, and it cost him something in his right shoulder, the old injury, finding the exact angle it had been waiting for. And when it was done, the man was on the ground, and Darien was breathing through his teeth, and Garrett was beside him, taking over the containment. 2 more on the north, one of Mercer's men said from 10 feet away, his voice barely above a murmur, moving along the fence line. Vasquez, Darien said, not yet visible. Vasquez wouldn't come in with his people. That was not how men like Vasquez operated. They applied pressure from a position of observation and waited for the thing they were pressuring to break open. He was outside the perimeter somewhere in the dark with the SUV and whatever else he had brought, and he was watching the fence line activity and recalculating the way any experienced man recalculated when the first approach didn't produce what he expected. What he had expected was a man coming out. What he had gotten was silence, and a fence breach that had not produced screaming. Mercer came from the north side of the building at a controlled run, low, staying in the shadow of the structure. He reached Darien and crouched, and the 2 of them were close enough that Darien could see the focused quiet in his face. The expression of someone in their operational element. All the social complexity burned away, down to the clear, hard core of a man who knew what to do in the dark. He's going to reposition, Mercer said. He's going to try the vehicle, Darien said, through the gate. If his people have us occupied at the fence line, he'll try to drive through the gate and end it fast. Mercer nodded. Gate's reinforced. He doesn't know that. He'll find out. He'll find out at about 15 miles per hour. Mercer looked at the gate, which is going to make noise. Yes, and noise is going to bring attention. Yes. Darien looked at him. Which is why we want him to try it, before his people finish working the fence. If he commits the vehicle while his men are still out there, he's divided. Mercer was quiet for a second, then said, You want to bait the gate. I want to bait the gate. What's the bait? Darien said, Me, at the gate, visible. Mercer looked at him with an expression that was not quite respect and not quite exasperation. Something that lived in the compound between them. She's going to have opinions about this. She can have them after. He moved before Mercer could construct an argument, along the shadow of the main building toward the front, where the gate sat at the end of the service road, and the dark beyond it held whatever Vasquez had brought. He stayed against the building until he was at the corner, then stepped out into the open space in front of the gate, illuminated, visible. Exactly what a man waiting to be seen looks like. He stood there. 3 seconds. 5. He could feel the crosshairs of an assessment on him. The specific sensation, impossible to explain to people who haven't experienced it, of being inside someone else's decision. The weight of being the object rather than the subject of a calculation. 7 seconds. The SUV's headlights came on at the end of the service road. It started moving. Darien held his position for 2 more seconds, long enough for Vasquez to commit, long enough for the vehicle to reach the speed that turned it from a vehicle into a statement. And then he moved left, hard, back toward the building wall. The SUV hit the gate at what had to be 40 miles per hour. And the gate did what reinforced steel gates do when they absorb 40 miles an hour of vehicle. It stopped the vehicle while the vehicle tried to continue. The sound of it was enormous in the quiet facility, a compression of metal against metal that rolled out across the Tacoma dark and started dogs barking somewhere in the distance. The airbags deployed. The SUV sat in the destroyed gate frame, engine ticking, driver stunned. Vasquez was not in the SUV. Darien understood this in the same moment. He heard Mercer shout something from the north side of the building. A single word, sharp. The kind of word that means position compromised. And then there were 2 shots from inside the facility perimeter, from the north, and then 1 more, and then silence. He ran. The north side of the facility was a concrete apron between the main building and the first outbuilding, a space used for equipment staging, lit now by the perimeter lights that had come on with the fence breach. In the middle of that concrete apron, 2 of Vasquez's men were down. Garrett was against the outbuilding wall with blood on his left arm, still standing, the weapon in his right hand. Mercer was at the corner of the main building, and opposite him, with his back to the second outbuilding, and a gun held in the careful way of someone who had been using guns since before it was legal for him to do so, was Emilio Vasquez. He was in his 60s, shorter than Darien had imagined, compact, with the coiled physical economy of a man who had survived a long time in situations that required efficient use of what he had. His face was the face of accumulated losses, a map of choices that had each seemed necessary at the time, and had together built something that could not be simplified into either villainy or grievance. It was, instead, just the specific weight of a life lived inside violence. He was looking at Darien, not at Mercer, not at Garrett, at Darien. The gate was a good idea, Vasquez said. His voice was the same as the phone, even, carrying its original architecture underneath the English. I didn't expect you to stand there. It worked, Darien said. It worked. Vasquez looked at the 2 men on the ground. They were alive. Darien could see that. The specific immobility of men who had been stopped rather than ended. Marco Delgado, Vasquez said. You don't know that name. No. He was 29. Vasquez said it without performance. Just the fact, placed in the air between them. He was running his first independent operation. The Seattle shipment. When your people moved on the containers, he was with the product. He made a decision to defend it. He paused. It was a bad decision. He was 29, and it was a bad decision, and now he's dead. And his mother asks me every month what happened, and I have been telling her for 18 months that I am handling it. Darien stood in the lit, concrete apron in Tacoma and looked at a man who had flown across the country to deliver a specific kind of accounting. He felt the weight of what Vasquez had just placed in the space between them, not the tactical weight of it. That was already managed. The men down, the gate destroyed, crosses people 2 hours out, Vasquez's remaining operational capacity roughly 0. The other weight, the weight of Marco Delgado's mother asking a monthly question. I didn't know about him specifically, Darien said. I know. That doesn't change what happened. No, Vasquez said. It doesn't. He looked at Darien with the eyes of someone making a final assessment. You came to Seattle for a woman. Darien didn't answer. I watched you stand at that gate, Vasquez said. You stood there so I would commit the vehicle. You put yourself in front of it. A man doesn't do that for a business calculation. He looked at the gun in his own hand, with the expression of someone reviewing a document they had already decided not to sign. Marco Delgado would have done something like that. He had that quality, the willingness to stand in the way of the thing. He was quiet for a moment. I miss him. The night held still around them. Rain had stopped. The facility lights hummed. Vasquez lowered the gun. He lowered it the way a man lowers something he has been carrying for a long time. Slowly, with the full awareness of what the lowering costs, what it concedes, what it does not repair. He set it on the concrete apron and took 2 steps back from it. This doesn't finish the account, he said to Darien. I want you to understand that. What you owe for Marco Delgado doesn't disappear, but I'm not going to collect it this way. He looked at the building, at the facility, at the space that held no version of the outcome he had come here for. A boy is still dead. Collecting anything tonight doesn't change that. Marco Delgado, Darien said. Vasquez looked at him. I'll remember it, Darien said. That's not enough. I know it's not enough, but I'll remember it. Vasquez looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the destroyed gate. Stepping through the warped frame, past the ruined SUV, out onto the service road, into the dark. He walked the way Nyla had walked out of that restaurant 7 months ago. With direction, without looking back. Mercer let him go. Darien let him go. Garrett slid down the outbuilding wall and sat on the concrete with his back against it and held his arm and breathed. And one of Mercer's men came around the corner and crouched beside him with a first aid kit that had the well-used look of a kit that had been opened before. Darien stood in the middle of the apron. He became aware after a moment that his legs were shaking. Not visibly, he was controlling it. But the shaking was there. The physical system running its delayed invoice for the last 2 hours. His shoulder was a specific, insistent pain. His hand had bled through the wrapping. He was standing in a facility in Tacoma at what was probably 2 in the morning, and the woman who had planned her disappearance for more than a year was somewhere in the main building behind him. He turned around. She was standing in the doorway. She had been there long enough to have seen Vasquez walk out. He could tell from her face the way it carried the last few minutes. Everything she had witnessed through that doorway processed and already being filed in the particular internal archive she kept. She was holding a bottle of water. She had found it somewhere in the facility. The way she found what was needed. The way she had always found what was needed. She walked across the concrete apron and held it out to him. He took it, drank. The water was cold and tasted like the container, and he had never been more grateful for anything. You let him walk, she said. Yes, he'll come back, maybe. Or he won't. He came here to deliver something, and he delivered it. And going home empty is its own kind of end. Darien looked at the destroyed gate. He's 63 years old. He was going to lose this tonight, regardless of how it went. I think he knew that. Nyla was quiet, looking at the gate. Marco Delgado, she said. You heard. I heard. 29, Darien said, running his first operation. I didn't know his name until tonight. She looked at him with those eyes, and he understood, without her saying it, without needing it said, that this was the thing. Not Vasquez, not the gate, not the parking structure, or the stairwell, or the 7 months since the anniversary dinner. The thing was this, that somewhere in the machinery of the life he had been running, a 29-year-old had made a bad decision and died for it. And Darien hadn't known his name, had never known his name, had never thought to know his name. The shaking in his legs got worse. He put a hand against the building wall. Sit down, Nyla said. I'm fine, you're not. Not a judgment. Just accurate. The way she was always just accurate. Sit down, Darien. He sat down against the building wall next to a first aid kit and a wounded man, and let the concrete take his weight. He closed his eyes for a moment and felt 7 months and 7 years, and the particular exhaustion of a man who has been running at speed for so long that stopping feels like a kind of falling. Nyla sat beside him, not close enough to touch, just beside. Present the way she had always been present, fully, without performance, without requiring anything from the moment, except to occupy it honestly. They sat in the Tacoma dark and listened to Garrett breathing and the distant sound of what might have been sirens 2 miles away and the facility generators and nothing else. The documentation you gave Renner, Darien said. Yes, you gave him the minimum. She didn't answer immediately. He opened his eyes and looked at her profile, the long line of her. The way she sat with her back straight even now, even here, even after everything the last 2 hours had contained. Mercer told you, she said. Yes, he shouldn't have. He thought I needed to know. She was probably right. She looked at the sky above the facility, the particular dark of a northwest night with cloud cover and no stars. I could have given them everything. You know that. I had everything. 4 years of it. I know. And you want to know why I didn't. He was quiet. He had asked this in a dozen ways over the last months without having the words for the specific question. And now that the words were available, he found he wasn't certain, He wanted the answer in the way he had believed he wanted it. He was afraid the answer would be small, practical, tactical, the calculation of a woman managing her exposure. He was afraid the answer would be large, something about who she was that made him understand, too late, what he had been living beside for 7 years without comprehending. "You don't have to answer it," he said. "I know I don't." She looked at him. "I didn't give them everything, because giving them everything would have been about destroying you. And even at the worst of it, even in the worst of the last year, I didn't want to destroy you." She said it the way she said the difficult things, which was the way she said everything, without flinching, without softening it into something easier to receive. "I wanted to be free of you. That's different." The distinction landed precisely. "Yes," he said, "it is. I spent 7 years trying to be worth your attention." She said, "I want you to understand that, not complaining about it. I made choices. I stayed. I did the things I did because I believed in what we could have been. But I spent 7 years invisible inside a marriage to a man who was very good at seeing everything except the person in the room with him." She was not crying. Her voice was what it always was. "And then I stopped, and leaving you with the minimum was the last thing I did for you. And I did it so I could stop. Not for you, for me. So that I could walk away clean and not be the person who dismantled you." "You were protecting yourself," he said. "I was protecting myself," she agreed. "And maybe also the 7 years. Maybe also the things that were real in it." She looked back at the sky. Both can be true. He looked at his hands, the wrapped one, the blood on the other. The hands of a man who had built something and defended it, and had not known for most of the building, and defending what he was spending to do it, or what the currency actually was. "I'm going to dismantle some of it," he said. She looked at him. "The organization, the parts that cost. I've been building towards something I stopped believing in 3 years ago, and kept building anyway, because it was what I knew how to do." He said it carefully. Not because the words were hard to find, but because he wanted them to be accurate. "Not all of it. I'm not going to pretend I'm going to become someone I'm not, but some of it needs to come down." "Because of tonight," she said. "Because of Marco Delgado," he said. "Tonight was a symptom. The disease is older." She looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't read what was in her face, which was familiar. He had never been able to fully read her, and this had been his failure more than her opacity. She was not a closed person. She was a person who gave you what she gave you and trusted you to pay attention. And he had not paid attention. And now he was sitting against a wall in Tacoma at 2 in the morning, trying to read a face he should have learned years ago. "I'm not coming back," she said. "I know. I need you to actually know that. Not to hear it, and file it as a temporary condition." She held his gaze without difficulty. The way she always held things that were difficult without looking like they were costing her. "Elena Ward has a life. It's a good life. It has things in it that I didn't know I needed because I spent 7 years not having them." "Mercer," Darien said. Not an accusation, just placing the word in the conversation where it belonged, among other things. She didn't look away. "He sees me. I know how that sounds. But it's the only way I know how to say it. He asks questions, and then he listens to the answers, and then he asks the next question. That's not a small thing." "No," Darien said. "It's not." They were quiet. Garrett said from 6 feet away, without opening his eyes, "Cross's people are 90 minutes out." "Thank you, Garrett," Darien said, just flagging it. Cross arrived at 4:15 in the morning with 4 men, and the controlled urgency of someone who had been managing a situation from a distance for several hours, and was now prepared to manage it from close range. He assessed the facility, the contained men, the destroyed gate, Garrett's arm, and Darien's general condition in approximately 90 seconds. And then he pulled Darien aside and spoke quietly for 5 minutes. And Darien listened and made 3 decisions, and Cross went to implement them. Mercer's people were released from the situation with the particular careful thanks that men in Darien's position gave to people who had done something that could not be officially acknowledged. Mercer himself stood near his truck in the early morning, the facility coming down from its heightened state around him. When Darien walked toward him, he didn't move, just waited with that same stillness. "Your facility," Darien said. "I'll repair the gate, send the bill to Cross. He'll handle it." Darien looked at him. The dawn was beginning somewhere behind the clouds, the dark thinning slightly in the east. She chose well. Mercer looked at him. I know. I mean that. He held Mercer's gaze. I'm not positioning it. I'm telling you that she chose well, and I can see it, and I'm glad she did. Something shifted slightly in Mercer's face, not softening exactly. The removal of a readiness he had been maintaining. She didn't need you to come here, he said. She was building something real. I know that now. She knew it before you showed up. Yes. Darien looked at the gray sky. That's the thing I'm going to have to live with. That she already knew it and was already doing it. And I came here because I couldn't accept that a world was being built without my involvement in it. He paused. I came here for me. I told myself it was for her. Mercer was quiet for a moment. She knows that. I know she does. He exhaled. Take care of her. I will. A beat. But she doesn't need me to take care of her either. That's also something you should understand. Darien almost smiled. I'm beginning to. He saw her once more before the cars came. She was standing on the east side of the facility, near the fence that had been breached, looking out at the service road in the early morning light. She had her arms at her sides for once, not crossed, not holding anything, just standing in the gray dawn with her hair still loose from the night and her coat damp from the hours of moving through it. He walked to her and stopped a few feet away, and they both looked at the service road. Where are you going now? She said. Home, he said. New York paused. There are things I need to take apart. That's going to take a long time. Yes, and Celeste, that ended before Seattle. I just hadn't closed the door yet. He looked at the pale line of the horizon beyond the service road, the east beginning to show itself. I'm going to fund something. A program. Community investment. Financial support for people rebuilding. It won't look exactly like what you're doing, but it'll. He stopped. I'm not telling you this to make a point. I know you're not. I'm telling you because I think I finally understand what you were trying to do, and because someone should do it in New York, and I have the means to do it. He looked at her. And because Marco Delgado was 29 years old, and his mother is still asking questions. Nyla looked at him. In her eyes, in the gray morning light, he saw something he hadn't expected. Not warmth, exactly. And not the closure that people talked about, as though it were a door you could locate and shut. Something quieter than either of those things. The specific expression of a woman who has put down something very heavy and is standing in the first morning of not carrying it, tired in the way of genuine relief. You should have been this person earlier, she said quietly. Not an accusation. A fact placed between them like the last piece of a thing assembled too late. Yes, he said. I should have. But you are now. I'm trying. She nodded once. The same nod she had given him the morning in the coffee shop, the nod of someone filing information accurately. Then go do it, she said. He looked at her for a moment longer. The last time he understood that he would look at her as the center of a question he was trying to answer. After this morning, she would simply be a person he had known. A person who had been more present in his life than he had deserved. A person who had extracted herself with intelligence and dignity and rebuilt something real on the other side of the extraction. He would not call. She would not want him to. He would not send messages or have cross-poll updates or find reasons to maintain a thread of contact with the life she was living in Seattle. Those were the moves of a man who still believed he was owed something. And he was not owed anything. He had been given 7 years of invisible work and invisible loyalty, and the smallest possible betrayal from a woman who had every reason to choose the largest one. That was not a debt you paid. That was a fact you lived with. And you let it change you, and you made something of the change. He turned and walked toward the cars. 8 months later, a community center opened in Lower Manhattan. It occupied the ground floor of a building in a neighborhood that had needed something like it for a decade. A space for financial counseling, job placement, support programs for women navigating situations that had no simple category. The funding was anonymous, routed through a foundation that had been established quietly and run by a small staff with clear objectives and no interest in recognition. Darien did not attend the opening. He watched it from a car parked half a block away. Not because he needed to see it. The reports from the foundation staff were thorough, and he trusted the people running it. He watched it because he needed to know that it existed in the physical world, and not only in the financial documentation he reviewed on Tuesday mornings. He needed to see people going through the door. He watched people go through the door for 40 minutes, and then his driver asked if he was ready, and he said yes. The organization was smaller than it had been a year ago. He had taken apart the parts that needed taking apart. Not cleanly, not without cost, not without consequences that would follow him for years in the form of severed relationships and recalibrated alliances, and the particular wariness that certain people now brought to interactions with a man who had voluntarily reduced his own power. It had been difficult and expensive, and he had done it anyway, because the alternative was to remain exactly what he had been. And he could not remain exactly what he had been. He thought about Marco Delgado's mother. He had sent something through a channel that could not be traced back to him. Not a payment, nothing could be payment. But as the acknowledgement of a debt that didn't dissolve simply because it couldn't be fully settled. He did not know if she had accepted it. He would never know. Some things you did without knowing the result. You did them because they were the correct thing to do, and because the correct thing didn't always come with confirmation. He had learned that from someone. He heard about the Meridian Forward expansion through a business contact who had no idea about the connection. A casual mention of a Seattle investment firm doing interesting work in the Pacific Northwest, expanding partnerships down the coast, Portland, then San Francisco, a network of organizations built on a specific model of support and community investment, gaining a reputation in the field for the quality of its work and the character of the people running it. He didn't reach out. He didn't send word through any channel. He let the news settle into the category of things that were good and that didn't require his involvement to remain good. In November, a year after Seattle, he received a single email from an address he didn't recognize. No subject line. One sentence in the body. I heard about the center. It's good work. No signature. No return address. The email account, when Cross looked into it at Darien's request, had been created and used once and then deleted. He read the sentence several times. He didn't reply. There was nothing to reply to. It had been said and received, and that was the appropriate shape of it. He closed the email, put his phone in his pocket, and walked to the window of his office, and looked at the city he had spent 15 years building something inside. And he thought about all the people who had passed through the gravity of that something without his really seeing them. And he understood that the center in Lower Manhattan and the dismantled pieces of what had been, and Marco Delgado's name remembered, were not redemption. Redemption was a word for stories that resolved into lightness. This resolved into responsibility, into the ongoing, unglamorous work of being different in specific ways on specific days, in the specific choices that came without announcement and required an answer. He had no illusions about himself. He was still the man he was. Capable of the same calculations, the same coldness, the same willingness to move on things that others couldn't afford to move on. That didn't disappear. It didn't get replaced by something cleaner. But there was a name in him now that hadn't been there before. And there was an understanding of a smile given in a restaurant on a rainy October evening by a woman who had known, before the leather folder was opened, exactly what she was going to do. It wasn't heartbreak, that smile. He understood it now completely. It was the expression of a woman who had been carrying something for a very long time and had just set it down at last. It was freedom, worn on the face of someone who had paid the full price of it and considered the price worth paying. Darien Voss stood at his office window and looked at New York, and let the understanding settle into him without trying to do anything with it. Some people are not meant to return. Some losses are the most honest things that ever happen to you. And some men, if they're fortunate, if they're paying attention for once in their lives, get the chance to become someone the people they lost wouldn't be ashamed of. He had that chance. He intended to use it. The city stretched out below him, indifferent and enormous, and full of people, building things and losing things, and trying to understand the difference between what they wanted and what they had thrown away. And the morning came over it the way morning always came, without ceremony, without mercy, the light finding everything equally, and asking nothing in return.